welcome and introduce Dr. Jordon Wade. He's Assistant Professor of Soil Health at the University of Missouri, Director of the Soil Health Assessment Center. So we had an opportunity to hear him at the Missouri Soil Health Conference, and we thought the topic was excellent. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and welcome Dr. Wade.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm excited to be here. I've watched all the soil health cafes from the website, and I'm really excited to finally get to give a presentation here. So my talk is I want to talk today about quantifying soil health and kind of give a little state of the science and where we are. And, I'm hoping in the breakout rooms that we can maybe discuss a little bit more about where folks are thinking, where are we headed? I really am looking forward to hearing from everybody. So, I want to start off kind of with a 10,000 foot view of soil health. We've all got a lot of thoughts bouncing around in our heads about what soil health is, how it isn't, et cetera. And so I kind of want to just give my perspective and kind of hopefully get us onto a similar page here. So, when I think about soil health, the first thing I like to think about is, we're often talking about soil health management, like some sort of land management. Usually we refer to that in an agronomic sense, but, I like to think about it somewhat broadly. And we're doing that management because we want that management to give us some sort of outcome. Now, those outcomes really vary from person to person and from operation to operation. So maybe the outcome is productivity, maybe it's profitability, maybe it is, biodiversity, maybe it's an outcome where you only have to work on the weekends because you've got your week, 9-to-5 job. There's so many different things that dictate which management kind of gives you your desired outcome. And now the problem is that when we give management suggestions or recommendations or prescriptions, that there are lots of kind of intervening variables here that make it so we can't just pick up one management and move it from place to place. These are all things that we are familiar with, things like climate, kind of the geology of the region, how long we've been doing a certain management, and then kind of more nitty-gritty stuff like soil texture, for example. And all of those things kind of dictate which management is going to give us our desired outcome. Now, those things make it very difficult. And so this is where soil health assessment comes in. So soil health assessment is kind of here to serve as the bridge between management and outcome. It's telling us, hey, this management that we're doing is putting us on the right track, or hopefully the right track, but maybe the wrong track for our desired outcome here. So the first step of this is to link management and assessment. And so NRCS has put together a good list of soil health principles that kind of help us guide management here. So these are perhaps familiar to folks. So they are: keep the soil covered, minimize disturbance, keep plants growing throughout the year, diversify what plants those are, and if possible, to incorporate livestock. Now, those principles kind of translate to hopefully improved assessments. And this is a figure that we're maybe familiar with here, where when we think about soil health, it's this confluence of different components of soil. So we have the physical and chemical components, and soil health is really trying to lean heavily on that biological component, bring that in and kind of integrate it with these other components of soil. Now, this brings me to my first take home. I know it's a little early in the talk for a take home, so hopefully you can take it home with you, but I want to just drive this, get this into people's heads that first off, soil health indicators are not the end into themselves. These indicators are very helpful, but they are a means towards translating management into our desired ends. So a lot of times, we say, we go out and we measure soil health things and we say it's going up, therefore good. However, this can kind of backfire because sometimes we say, hey, this management is causing soil health indicators to go up, therefore this indicator represents soil health. However, sometimes people have the kind of opposite approach and they say, when they're developing indicators, hey, these indicators go up or down with this X, Y, or Z management, therefore X, Y, or Z management builds soil health. So the problem is that this is kind of a little bit of a circular logic here. And it kind of points to the fact that we really need to ground our assessments in something tangible and to connect it to those outcomes. Because if we stop at assessment, we've only done half of our job so far. So just again, to bring us back to this, that assessment is the bridge between management and our desired outcome. Now, this is going to bring us to the second point, which I am going to spend a little bit of time on today, which is that we really need to be careful with how we interpret those assessments. We don't want to assume that assessment is equal to outcome. Now, usually when we get some sort of soil health assessment, we get back from the lab or from the form that we're following or what have you, we get back some sort of soil health score. It's usually one value. Sometimes they break it out into the different components that are used to make up that value. But that value, calculating it, is quite the computationally intensive endeavor, right? And so this diagram here, comic, is supposed to kind of represent that we often are, going through many twists and turns to get that soil health score. And therefore, sometimes I'm going to propose that we need to rethink how we do that in order to make sure that we're actually connecting to the outcomes. And so to maybe give a good example here, I want to just give a little cautionary tale. Now, this is not work that I've done. This is some work that Emily Oldfield and Mark Bradford at Yale did. And they were looking at soil organic matter or soil carbon. And they were kind of looking in depth at this claim that we're all very familiar with, which is more soil organic matter or more soil carbon means greater productivity. And so they said, we're kind of asking a question, is that actually true? And so they did two different studies that I think couple well with one another. And so the first one is they kind of did a meta-analysis and they took observations from all over the globe. And they said, looking at nitrogen fertilization rate and soil organic carbon and productivity, they said, what are the relationships between these? And they found this kind of interesting thing, which is that as yields do go up with soil carbon, but then there is a leveling off eventually at some point. Now, they like to put it around 2.5% was what they put it. I think you could put it somewhere around the 2 to 2.5% soil organic carbon spot. Now, this is just kind of observational. This doesn't actually tell us if, this isn't necessarily the most reliable way of making management decisions. So then they decided to look at this through a sort of direct manipulation. And so they got a high organic matter soil, around about like 9.5%, and they kind of diluted it down. And they saw, okay, what happens as we dilute this down? What happens to productivity? And they looked at irrigation and nitrogen inputs as well. But they found a similar thing, which is that productivity is not linear with soil organic carbon content. And again, they found this kind of threshold, if you will, this optimum, around about 2 to 2.5% SOC, which corresponds to in the neighborhood of 4 to 5% organic matter. Remember, organic matter is about half carbon by mass. So this is just meant to kind of, again, be a cautionary tale that we can't always assume that the way that these, we can't assume that these indicators behave the way that we think they do. Now, of course, these are kind of, multi-site studies and looking at one specific thing. And so I want to kind of look a little bit deeper at soil health indicators specifically and ask the question, what about variation within a site from these soil health indicators? Now, this is a study that Rick Haney did with some colleagues down in Texas. And so this was on one of their experiment stations. And so they decided to go out and do a very high intensity grid sampling. So they were going out and sampling every 35 meters or so. And what they did is they were looking to link the Haney soil health score with productivity. And luckily within their study site, they had a couple different soil types here. You can see the legend down here, but the thing to note is that these letters here indicate different soil types within their study region. Now, what they found was, first off, that there was some pretty considerable variations in yield within a field. This is familiar to anyone who's ever been out into a semi-large field, is that things can be a little uneven. You have some regions that just yield better. Now, they had a pretty considerable range here. You see that they have about 6 tons per hectare all the way down to 0.3. So again, huge range of yield within the site. Now, when you look at it here, you can see that those regions here, these red regions of low yield, also corresponded to regions of low soil health scores. So it's really easy to say then, oh, we could maybe guess, lower soil health, lower yields, and higher soil health, higher yields. However, when they kind of put this thing together, they said, yeah, when we lump it all together, we do see this generally positive relationship, right? Their R squared here is not fantastic, but it is just this generally positive relationship between the soil health value and their corn yield. Now, when they split it out though, among those different soil types, what you see is that it's not quite so straightforward, right? So for example, this one has a slightly positive slope. This one is maybe no slope, no relationship between soil health and yield. This one's negative, and this one's again slightly positive. So what we see is that we can't just say necessarily higher soil health equals greater yields. We're not quite there yet in the confidence with these indicators to make that jump. So this is just, a reminder of an old saying that we're used to, which is that correlation is not causation. And I want to just bring one of my favorite examples here, which is the relationship between the per capita consumption of cheese and the number of people who died by getting tangled in their bed sheets. And now you can see that these things are pretty closely linked over time, right? We have an R of 0.95 or an R squared of 0.9. However, clearly, and luckily for those of us who like cheese, eating more cheese isn't going to give us greater risk of dying from our bed sheets. And this applies equally to soil health scores or for bedsheet deaths. So the actual question that we want to answer here is if you improve soil health within a given field, specifically if you go out and you were to improve soil health, does that actually mean that your productivity in your field will increase? Well, to answer this question, this was something that I worked on during my PhD at Ohio State, and we did a big multi-site study, and this was mainly across the Eastern Corn Belt, and it was looking at these rain-fed corn systems. And these were all N-rate trials, and layered on top of each of these N-rate trials, we had this wide range of soil health building practices. Cover crops, we had mixes, we had grasses, legumes, etc., changes in tillage intensity, rotation, and also manure. And again, that's layered on top of these nitrogen rate trials. And so we ended up with about 30 sites spread across these states and about 400 observations total. And, we got a pretty good representative sample in terms of when we, the soil types represented here. So we had to come face to face with a couple things first. So the first one is that every field is different. Here, each color represents a field, and each of these little colored dots represents a kind of observation, a sample that we go out and take within that field. Now, there are a couple ways that folks, when they do soil health work, they tend to deal with this, multi-site studies. So one way is they kind of throw it all together in something that's called complete pooling. Now, and they look at it and they say, well, there's this positive line, therefore more soil health, more yield, boom, we're done. Now, when we look at it though by site, we can see that there's this clustering, right? We see that each of these colors is with the other similar colors. So, we're confounding the effect of site and the effect of soil health. Now, the other way that people do it is they take all the observations from a field and they just average it and they put it together. And what that can do is that underestimates your effect size. You're not accounting for variations within a site of soil health. So to maybe do both of these things at once, walking and chewing bubblegum, we had to come up with a statistical model. This is not a unique one, but a unique application where we kind of let every field, which is denoted by color, again, start at a different spot. And we said, those variations in soil health within the field, how do those relate to changes in yield? Again, we want to know if you go out and change your soil health, should you expect a change in yield? And again, we were looking at soil health and it was kind of agnostic to the management. We had all different types of managements in here. We were taking a step back and thinking about just soil health more generally. Now, this kind of begs the question is, how do we measure soil health fairly across so many sites? And so, usually when we go out and measure soil health, we measure a bunch of different things. And this is kind of tricky. How do we combine those things? And, everyone has their preferred way of taking those measured variables and using them to describe soil health. But soil health is not something that we can go out and directly measure. And so these scores that come out of it are, to be frank, somewhat arbitrary, right? Why does 100% on a Haney's test correspond to 100% on a Cornell test? Well, no, they don't. It's not usually that straightforward. And it says that this number assigned to soil health is clearly not a universal thing. Now, however, if we kind of switch it, the narrative here, and we say soil health is something that's out there and we're just trying to measure it, and it's something kind of underlying, and all of these indicators imperfectly measure it, that kind of gives us a different approach. And I'll spare you all the numerical, the quantitative reasons why that distinction is different. But this is a pretty well-tested way of looking at things. The quintessential example would be intelligence. You go out, you take your math test, your English test, your reading test, your Rubik's Cube test, and all of those things collectively kind of measure this underlying thing that we like to think of as, IQ or intelligence or book smarts. And so this really is wondering, like, what is nature telling us and what is kind of out there, this latent variable analysis approach. Okay, getting beyond that, we then wanted to convert this into a testable causal model. And now it's really important to emphasize that this is trying to move beyond correlation to causation. And so we set up this model. It's a measurable way of looking at it. And we parse out those variables that have an effect on everything within a site versus those things that operate within a site. So things like rain. It rains somewhat evenly across the field. Well, we have to assume that. Similarly, the sunshine is somewhat even across this field, and there's similar soil types. However, within a field, we have our imposed treatments that give us a gradient of soil health, and we have our N fertilization and our pre-plant inorganic N. Excuse me. Now, so what this does is it measures the consistency and the magnitude of the effect of soil health within a site. Now, again, that's important because what this does is, again, this moves us beyond just correlations and helps us approach causation. Now, why is this letting us get to causation? Well, for a couple of reasons. First off, we are manipulating soil health within a given site, right? According to management, we get this gradient of soil health. But we're not focused on the management, whether it's tillage or cover crops or whatever. We're focused on the signal that management is sending us from within the soil. Then lastly, we're controlling for a lot of these potential variables and not double counting them. And again, this is a quantitative thing that I'm going to gloss over for now, and I'm ecstatic to talk with people more about it later. Okay, so finally getting to the meat of it, the thing that you want to know is a healthy soil actually more productive? And the short answer is yes. And soil health positively influenced yield, corn grain yields here. And we're talking a 20% increase in soil health led to about, on average, a 5% increase in corn yields. So that's this arrow here, what it's telling us. Now, additionally, what we found out is that nitrogen fertilization does also increase soil health. So we can't just do away with nitrogen and rely all on soil. There is a little bit of need for this fertilization to improve and maintain soil health. For those who care about model fits a whole lot, I will just suffice to say for now that the model fit was great. So what we can take away here is that improving soil health actually does increase productivity. And we can be pretty sure of this because we went out, we took multiple fields with multiple observations. We then did a assessment that was a little more fair. We let every field kind of have a different starting spot and see if the effect of soil health was consistent across those fields. And what we found was that there was a consistent effect of soil health on yield across those studies. So this says that we can probably use these indicators. We're not necessarily all the way there yet, but this does say that we're kind of on the right track. So I'm just about coming to times, but I wanted to remind you of the two take homes here. So the first one is that indicators are not the means, right? Indicators are the means to deciphering management effects. They are not the ends. They are supposed to help us bridge across all of these different sites. If we only do a soil health assessment, then we are only halfway done. And this brings me, of course, to the second one, which is that these assessments, we haven't definitively and authoritatively linked them to desirable outcomes yet. It's not impossible, we're on the right track, but it's really tricky and we need to be super careful. Also, I mentioned the study that I did, that was just productivity. We're not talking about things like water quality or end use efficiency or anything like that. We haven't gotten there yet. This is purely looking at productivity and agronomics. Cool. Well, so with that, I just want to say thank you and take a couple minutes now for questions, comments, etc.